Okay, this is the second of two SY3 screencasts examining the role of the nation state. So if you remember, in the first screencast we started by defining the nation state. And remember, what we mean by the nation state is a political and legal entity that exercises authority over a distinctive territory. We also discussed the historical origins of the nation state. And also we spent quite a bit of time looking at some of the ways in which globalization is affecting the role of the nation state. And in this screencast we're going to have a look at two issues that are really important to contemporary debates about the role of the nation state. We're going to look at the idea of devolution and also this idea of nationalism. Hopefully one of the things that you can remember from the first screencast on the nation state was the famous quotation from the American sociologist Daniel Bell, who famously observed that nation-states, national governments, have become too small to respond to some of the global issues and challenges that they face because of this phenomenon that we call globalization. But the other part of Daniel Bell's quote was this argument that the nation-state at the same time has become too big to deal with some of the small questions, some of the issues that affect particular cities or particular regions within a nation state. So this perception that the nation state has become too big has led to demands for more political decisions to be taken at more of a local level. And this is known as devolution. So as you can see with this definition, devolution can be defined as the dispersal of power away from the centre to outlying areas. And what that's meant practically in a UK context is we've seen the UK Parliament, based in London, the political centre of the United Kingdom, devolve or give away some of its powers to regional assemblies in other parts of the UK. So Tony Blair's new Labour government that was elected in 1997 oversaw the creation of a separate parliament in Scotland, a National Assembly for Wales, a Northern Ireland Assembly, and also a directly elected London Mayor and a Greater London Authority. And these institutions, prior to the election of that Labour government in 1997, didn't exist. So we had the UK Parliament, above that the European Parliament, and then we had local councils. So devolution involved the creation of these regional assemblies. So the building that you can see in this image is the Scottish Parliament, based in Edinburgh, and the Scottish Parliament is quite powerful. It's able to vary the rate of income tax within Scotland by plus or minus 3%, and it's also able to introduce new laws, primary legislation on a range of social and economic affairs. So as a result of these devolved powers, things like educational policy in Scotland are quite different to educational policy in England. So you'll probably recognise this particular image of the student protests against the government decision to increase tuition fees. However, in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament, who have responsibility for education, have decided that Scottish students studying degree courses at Scottish universities do not have to pay any tuition fees at all. Also, in relation to health, there are no prescription charges for any British citizen living in Scotland. Okay, in this map of the UK we can see the country divided up into the 650 constituencies that elect members of Parliament during a UK general election. And the thing that I just want you to note at the moment about this map is the difference between England and Scotland and also Wales. If you look at the electoral map of England, we see a lot of blue. Okay, the Conservative Party, their main stronghold is England, particularly in the south of England. Whereas if you look at the electoral map of Scotland and also Wales, you don't find very much blue. In fact, what you find much more of is red, particularly in these densely populated areas in the south of Wales and in the central belt of Scotland. And this meant in the period from 1979 to 1997, a period of unbroken conservative rule, the pressure within Wales, but particularly Scotland, for devolution became very great. For example, Margaret Thatcher's most unpopular policy was the poll tax, and this policy was actually piloted in Scotland, an area of the country that had never really supported Margaret Thatcher's government, before being introduced in other parts of the UK. And this was so unpopular with Scottish people that it led to many Scottish voters wanting to take more decisions of their own and increase the support for devolution inside Scotland. In addition to the political reasons for devolution, we should also recognise some of the cultural reasons for devolution. In particular, we should remember that Britain is not really a single nation state. It's actually a multi-nation state consisting of the nations of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, and each of these regions has its own distinctive history and cultural identity. So devolution offers people a way of expressing these cultural identities, and for some Scottish nationalists, they would see devolution as a stepping stone towards independence for Scotland from the rest of the UK. So debates about devolution and cultural identity can't really be separated from debates about nationalism. So I want to spend the last part of this screencast looking at this concept of nationalism. And nationalism involves patriotism. So it involves a psychological attachment of loyalty to one's nation or country. So it's a sense of pride in a particular nation. And governments will often try to build a sense of patriotism. So they do this in a variety of ways, through flags, through national anthems, through sometimes compulsory military service, through statues of national heroes, creating myths and narratives about the nation. And schools, as important agencies of socialisation, play a particularly important role in promoting nationalism. And this, of course, is one of the reasons why the teaching of history within schools is always politically contentious, because history offers governments the opportunity to share their nationalising narratives with a new generation, and these narratives are often based on a mythical past. And nationalism is also constructed often in opposition to an idea of otherness. So a big part of Scottish nationalism, for example, is not being English. And of course wars and conflicts with other nation states also reinforce a shared national identity. Now, in the context of contemporary British politics, the term nationalism is used to describe firstly those people who want Wales and Scotland to become more independent from the rest of the United Kingdom, but also the term nationalism is used in a different way. There's also a kind of darker side of nationalism that is used to describe right-wing extremist groups. So the guy that you can see in this picture is a guy called Alex Salmond. He's the leader of the Scottish National Party, and the Scottish National Party wants Scotland to become an independent sovereign state separate from the rest of the United Kingdom. And as you're probably aware, there will be a referendum on this issue in the year 2014. But as I mentioned earlier, there's also a darker side of nationalism that has nothing to do with the calls for independence in Scotland or more devolution in Wales. There's this other type of nationalism that's often referred to as right-wing extremism, which I guess expresses a really extreme form of patriotism, a kind of form of national chauvinism marked out by feelings of superiority over other countries. And right-wing extremists try to exclude certain groups from their idea of nationalism, from their idea of the national community. So certain groups are excluded on the basis of things like their race, their ethnicity or their religion. And the guy that you can see in this photograph is Nick Griffin, who is currently leader of the British National Party, which is an example of a right-wing extremist party. The stated aim of the BNP is an all-white Britain. Another example of right-wing extremism in the context of contemporary British politics is the street-based movement, the English Defence League, and this is a racist movement based on Islamophobia. And one of the things that is extremely worrying about politics in Europe at the moment are the rise of these right-wing extremist groups in many different countries. So what you can see in this picture is a group from Greece, a neo-fascist group called the Golden Dawn, and as you're probably aware from the news, the economic climate in Greece at the moment is very, very severe. It's a place of hopelessness, and even the Prime Minister of Greece has compared the country in terms of its mood to the Weimar Republic in Germany in the 1930s. And unfortunately, there are parallels. So you've got mass unemployment, you've got a collapse of trust in the main political parties and the established media, and then you've got these right-wing thugs meting out their violence on the streets.